second one, which has already been filmed, and I'm interested to see where that's going to go because Will Smith is not involved. But
is that coming out this summer?
I don't know if it's this. I think it is. But also, Will Smith's son in the movie is supposed to be basically like the character that is going to the film is going to be focused around.
Jaden Smith. Is it Jaden Smith?
No, not his actual son.
Okay, I'm just making sure he wasn't the actor in it because I was just like, I don't know if that would actually just turn me off from.
I don't know if it's because it wasn't actually his son, but in the movie it was the kid.
You know, look it up as we're talking.
He's like, remember at the end of the movie, he's like, "Did I promise you fireworks?" And he's holding that kid. I think that's the kid that's actually going to be, kind of the focal character. But
well, it says right here Liam Hemsworth is in it, so I'm assuming he's going to be one of the leads.
Yeah, he is in it.
And
what's his name? Jeff Goldblum's came back.
Yeah, here he is.
His Jewish father came back.
Bill Pullman's in it with a. Well, in his picture, he's got a huge beard, so I don't know if that's in the movie, but it should be interesting. I mean, you have the characters that are who are holdovers from the first film, so that'll bring those fans.
I don't know why Will Smith didn't want anything to do with this. I feel like it would have been kind of a good movie for him, a good move for him. I mean, he hasn't really done anything standing out. He's making that movie about how there's serious injury or long-term effects to.
Well, it's a true story. I mean, I'm definitely as a huge football fan, I'm definitely interested in seeing.
What the hell is the name of that movie?
It's called Concussion.
Concussion. Thank you.
But it's based on a real story. I mean, he plays a real doctor who is tried to be this advocate for making these rules much more stringent.
And that didn't work.
Now, well, I mean, they have a concussion protocol in the NFL now that they've really implemented, over the past several years, and they take it much more seriously because of some of these players who have actually retired, been afflicted with this, and have actually, a couple of them committed suicide. One of whom was, on the Patriots.
Junior Seau.
And there was, I'm trying to think of the other one. Was it Steve McNair? I think he actually killed himself for something else. I think it was Steve McNair. But there was somebody else.
And then you had that other guy, Chris Benoit. But Chris Benoit was a whole different thing. He ended up torturing his family, which was horrible.
Yes,
because of excessive steroid use from roid rage. But that was a whole different thing. But then there's, I mean, as far as Junior Seau, he's the guy who literally just shot himself in the heart. And what I was talking to Jim the other day, Jim Rock, who's a friend of ours, he's really big into football as well. He mentioned that Junior Seau actually shot himself in the heart.
Yes.
So they could actually study his brain.
Yes.
Because that's what he was suffering from.
Yes.
So he, purposely took himself out, not in the head, so that they could use his brain for some kind of study. So, to see the long-term effects of this disease. So it's interesting. But I mean, leading into, you're talking. I forgot where we
started with Will Smith being in Independence Day 2.
Yeah.
But I think Will Smith has come very far since then, and like we see with a lot of actors, I don't necessarily think they all want to revisit some of those iconic roles because it was been there, done that.
And also, you don't want to take the chance of tarnishing it.
Sure, and to me, Independence Day is a film that didn't need a sequel. I would have been perfectly fine.
Yeah, I don't think it needed a sequel either.
Dying in hopefully many, many years and saying, okay, we didn't need a sequel to that. But since they're making it, I'm definitely interested because I'd like to see where they're going to go, how they're going to create it for this, modern audience, which would be, God, almost 20 years later. If it does come out, it would be 20 years later. It's getting so hard to believe that the 90s were that far ago. That's why I feel like that decade just felt a lot longer and, played out. But it made me think, too, with the 90s, when you were talking earlier about going to the movies, it reminded me of when I snuck into a couple myself. I was able to get in, though, unlike you. I got stopped a couple times, and they did the same bullshit. But I remember sneaking into White Men Can't Jump.
Oh, such a good movie. It's such a good movie.
Such a ridiculous premise, but I loved it. And I just felt like the biggest badass on earth because I was actually able to get into a rated R movie. And I felt like the biggest badass on earth until I was able to sneak into another movie that was even better than that. And that was Speed.
Oh, great movie.
And snuck into that. Still don't know how he did it.
It was cans. Just cans.
Just cans.
What do you do, hotshot?
It was good. It was such a good film, though, because again, a ridiculous premise when you think about it, but
great work by Jeff Daniels as well.
Unique in the sense, absolutely unique in the sense that we had never seen anything like that, so we were ready for the ride.
Yeah,
and literally, and we just said, "All right, we're gonna accept this kind of crazy premise," because it was action packed and there weren't boring parts. There were cool little twists in it, and Keanu Reeves, people knew him from a variety of things prior to that. I think Jeff Daniels had done Dumb and Dumber, and Dennis Hopper, of course, and Sandra Bullock, that was her first big role.
Yeah, and
it was cool to see. That was a movie that stuck out to me definitely as a fun one of the 80s, and nothing that was really
the 90s. You mean?
Yeah, geez, God, yeah. Of the 90s, and nothing that's really been duplicated since. I don't think they should ever reboot. Let's reboot Speed.
Wasn't there Speed 2 Cruise Control?
Yeah, but not
Patrick.
Reboot. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah. I'm just forgetting that one.
Yeah, I'm just joking
on purpose. But
yeah,
I think it's one that won't necessarily be copied. It did well, and I think it just it took this idea and just really stretched it out into something cool with some let's suspend our disbeliefs and you'll have a good time. I'm sure people scrutinized it, but
I mean, if you talk about going along for the ride and how crazy of a movie this was, I mean, we talk about an iconic film that broke some records. It was Titanic. I mean, Titanic was definitely a 90s movie that stood out. I mean, and I think it actually hit people very hard because they made that. I mean, the hour and a half that ship is going down, and you see graphically our perception of what actually happened to people falling off the ship, taking really bad falls, freezing to death, drowning in the ship. It's like if you see a movie like that, there's that moment where you're like, well, this is all fake. Yes. But then when you're watching that and something like that really happened, it really is it's an emotional experience, and I've never been to a movie and literally sat there in the theater and heard that many people crying. I mean, crying in the theater. It's unbelievable.
It's sad too that the majority of us, myself included, were going to that movie to see what happened.
Right.
Because we're like, all right, we're not going to watch real people. We're watching fictional versions of them and maybe some real people. And then you heard about the story, the backstory, the whole Leonardo DiCaprio, Kate Winslet part. But you're really going there to watch the special effects. And when you think about it, it's scary that that's the reason why I think that movie did so well, because you're not going in there just to watch the love story. You're watching in there to see that ship sink.
Well, I mean...
And then you're seeing it and you're like, wow, this is really tough to watch, but I know this is why I came here, but now I don't want to watch this. So it was a really bizarre experience for me. I didn't shed tears, but I felt for certain parts, especially the mother who's trapped with her kids inside.
Oh my God.
That was a tough part that stood out to me.
That and the old couple on the bed that are just waiting to
drown. And the band who keeps playing as it's going down. There were a lot of I think James Cameron, and I know people have their opinions of him. I think for that he did try to put some really great heart into that. And I thought it was a well done film. It wasn't something that it brought in both, I think, men and women. It wasn't just, the romantic part of it and sappiness, and there was some of that, but there was, a good story, a good thread. They had to have the Billy Zane antagonist part that they created. So there were interesting characters in it as well, and some other subplots that occurred. But to me, that was a big, and that was the one that broke all of the records.
Broke all the records, but I think a lot of teenage girls did go to see DiCaprio multiple times. I mean, he was a big player at the time, so that also increased ticket sales. I think my sister went to see that movie 4 times.
Yep.
And she was one of the people who at one point was with her girlfriend and kind of was you could hear them like I was sitting at a different part of the theater and I'm like, oh my God, my sister's literally crying right now about this movie.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It was just one of those movies that was iconic, and again, James Cameron breaking. I think he broke his own record with Avatar. So unbelievable. And then another movie that stands out for me in '90s was our school took us to the theater to see it.
think I know where you're going. I was about to just say it.
And I wouldn't have gone to see it otherwise was Forrest Gump.
Oh, I'm thinking of something else, but let's talk about Forrest Gump, because that was a good one.
And Forrest Gump, I think, I went into that movie and didn't know anything about it. We were like literally went on like a field trip one day, and we went to the movie, and I didn't even watch the preview. And I went in and I'm like, okay, well, this guy obviously has some sort of a mental disability. I didn't understand where we were going with it. But as the movie started, I learned a lot about like history, about like what was going on in the Vietnam War, and he goes into his life, and then, he has a son, and it was like this whole...
It blended a lot of historical events together with this fictional story, which I agree with you on that. You get to learn, and they did the splicing with him and different presidents and different figures, and it was so cool to me because here you had this guy who had a disability, who just, it didn't even faze him, and he knew he had it, but he was a college graduate, he was a football hero, he was a Vietnam War hero, he got to have a relationship, albeit a short time, with his childhood sweetheart. He saw people pass away. He had his own child, and this is why Tom Hanks won the Academy Award. And it was incredible watching this, because that was something that really wasn't done too. You had a protagonist whom you follow that has a disability. We didn't necessarily know what it was. Like there were so many parts of him. It was very intelligent. Yeah. So it's like he was just a little behind in some aspects, and I just loved that because
it was against all odds kind of story.
Yeah, you mean you see the kids throwing rocks at him at the beginning, and he breaks away from the braces, and we see that type of stuff, that bullshit today, with bullies and taunting people who appear to be different. And I think that movie advocated a lot for that, and became a nice mainstay of that decade, and also brought in a lot of money, I think, word of mouth, and it was just a good film. Yeah, I don't know if I would have seen it necessarily either, but we went as like a family with another, other friends and of the family and their kids, when I think movies also had more importance.
Yeah, it was like a family gathering.
Yeah, and I don't know if that, it's tough to see if that really fully happens today.
Yeah.
But I think, in terms of the 90s, it was that. And I also remember, if I can just quickly interject, because it's Tom Hanks and it's 90s, and it was back-to-back years, was Philadelphia.
Oh, another great
I also saw in the theater with my mother. Because my father, when he worked in the day, in the summers, like we would go to, my mother would take us to the movies quite a bit, which was nice when because she would work nights sometimes. And I remember seeing that one too. And it was just like he played Forrest Gump one year, and then he played, this guy who has AIDS, who was gay, and gets fired because of that. So those films were really ahead of its time, because in that decade, I can't say for certain how many people were very open-minded about, people who are gay.
Well, and I think that was also a time for cinema to kind of, push the envelope a little bit. They were trying things that we hadn't done yet, like using, putting issues out there that were kind of, a little taboo at the time, but also bringing them to the forefront. And Tom Hanks was at the top of his game at that point. That was when he was like, he's still doing great work.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was just like, it was Forrest Gump, it was Philadelphia. I mean, you name it. He was in a ton of shit.
And I remember, seeing Tom Hanks in so many comedies. And I remember, I think it was like the late 80s. It was like Turner and Hooch, and he was so funny in that. And then seeing him do the dramas, and I'm like, man, I want the funny Tom Hanks back. And now, all I love is the drama Tom Hanks. So when I see a comedy, it's like awesome, because I know he can do it. And even if it's like a movie that's not like a ha-ha slapstick, like 80s comedy Tom Hanks, we still get to see that. And he's brilliant. And I loved those two films. And just the fact that the issue was brought to the forefront. And I remember very vividly, Denzel Washington's character was very homophobic. And then by the end of that movie, he's not. And I think that people can change when they're encountering. He really sees the injustice that happens, and that's why he defends him. And it's such a powerful film. And also when AIDS was really big.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that and being very scared of what that disease was, and like, how do people get it? And, I understood the sexually transmitted part.
Yeah, and there were
we also know blood transfusions, things like that. So it was a very like teachable film. Like, you could go home and talk with your family about what you just watched. And I think that's what we did. So it was very educational.
Well, that was like movies that I used to talk about with with my family was you talk about teachable moments. I mean, this brings me into when you said that